I'm joined by Professor Timothy Noakes and Chef Jonno Proudfoot. They're here to talk about their book, The Real Meal Revolution. It's on Jonno's shirt right there. They've written it along with Sally Ann Creed and David Greer. Thank you so much for joining us in studio.
Thanks very much for having us.
Okay, so let's chat about this book. The mission is to change the world one meal at a time. Can you guys tell me how you're going to do this?
Over to you.
Well, we were pretty healthy up until 1977, when the Department of Agriculture in the United States of America decided that fat was very bad for us and we should eat cereals and grains and vegetables and fruits. Mm-hmm. And as a consequence of that decision, it is our contention that obesity and diabetes has become rampant around the world. And so it was taking fat out of the diet without understanding what would be the consequences. Because if you take fat out of the diet, you have to add carbohydrates. Right. And there are some people who can survive on lots of carbohydrate. But many of us have a condition called carbohydrate intolerance, and we do very poorly on carbohydrates. We become progressively heavier with age. We find it very difficult to control our weight. We're always hungry. If we're physically active, we find our physical activity goes down. So we become obese, and ultimately we may develop diabetes as well. So those are some of the consequences of a high carbohydrate diet in people who are insulin or carbohydrate resistant. And what we're saying is, hold on. Find out whether you're carbohydrate intolerant or not. If you aren't, fine. But if you are carbohydrate intolerant, this is the diet you have to eat because you're going to be super healthy as a consequence.
How do you find out?
Well, I think you can judge by some of the points I've already made, that if you become progressively heavier and you're always hungry, that's one of the keys. You're always hungry and you're always looking for carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. So you have a big breakfast and 3 hours later you're already trying to eat something else. That's kind of the signs that you're going that way. You can test your blood. There are a whole bunch of things you can measure in your blood. We argue that the HbA1c, or glycated hemoglobin, complex term, but it's very important for your health to know what your glycated hemoglobin value is. Because if it's 5, you're perfectly healthy, you're going to live forever. But if it's 6.5, you're diabetic. And we all fit in somewhere between the two, between 5 and 6.5. And the higher you are above 5.5, then it's a very good idea to start restricting carbohydrates. But I think the key is, if you can't control your weight, everyone complains they've got a bit of a tummy or something. That's just a sign that you're secreting too much insulin, you're eating too much carbohydrate. Cut the carbohydrates, reduce them to a certain amount, and that flab will just disappear.
Really?
Yes.
As simple as that?
True story, yeah.
No, it is real. I mean, obesity is caused by the hormone insulin. Insulin packs on the fat, and insulin is driven by carbohydrates in the diet. And the more carbohydrate intolerant or insulin resistant you are, the more insulin you secrete when you eat carbohydrates, and as a consequence, the fatter you get.
Okay, and Jonno, you're a chef.
Yes.
And you created the recipes in the book.
Yes, with the constraints that Sally Ann and Prof drew out. So I have a much less scientific view on everything.
Well, we're going to get both sides, so it's fine. You're also an athlete.
Yes. Yeah.
So Prof just said if you taking a lot of carbohydrates, it could eventually make you tired as an athlete, slower. What's your experience training on carbohydrates and on the real meal revolution?
So yeah, it's a great question. I'm not as sensitive to carbohydrates as say someone who's diabetic, but I do find when I add carbohydrates to my diet, I put on weight, and no matter how much exercise I do, it's the level of carbohydrate in my diet that actually affects my weight, and not the amount of exercise I do. And so that's my weight. And then in terms of performance, when I eat carbohydrates, I can tell the next day I feel sluggish and tired. And when there are no carbs in my diet, especially about 2 or 3 days after I remove them completely, and I've had a lot of fat, my endurance really increases, and I can perform much better over long distances. I'm a swimmer, so I'll be doing a 10-kilometer swim, for instance, and I can actually get that extra mile without needing goos and energy drinks and all those sugary things that everyone thinks they need. You don't. You just need fat and water, and you'll be fine.
So no sugar is what we're saying for athletes, and high fat. Okay.
We're not saying it for everyone.
Not
there
for
are
everyone.
some athletes who will benefit by eating carbohydrates, but a lot of the people who are a little bit overweight, and if you look at the average athlete today, the average runner running the Comrades Marathon, or the average athlete doing the Argus Cycle Tour, most of them carry a belly, and that belly is there because I caused it, and I apologize.
But now you're trying to fix it.
I told them to eat lots of carbohydrates, and now I'm saying no, that's fine if you're lean, but if you're not so lean, you think about it and experience what Jonno did and what I did, that our performances suddenly went up when we cut the carbohydrates.
So some of the controversy around the book is the fact that you're telling people to take in a lot of fat. I mean, previously we thought a lot of fat will increase cholesterol, heart disease. Can you elaborate more on this?
Well, I think it's really important to make the statement at the front that the Harvard School of Public Health has released a statement a few months ago saying we were wrong, that fat is not the cause of heart disease, or fat in the diet is not the cause of heart disease. Now, we either listened to the Harvard School of Public Health because 30 years ago, they were absolutely committed to the high carbohydrate diet and said that it will reduce heart disease rates by something like 50%. That hasn't happened because it was all wrong. See, it's not cholesterol that causes heart disease. It's a subfraction of cholesterol. That's what you have to understand. And that subfraction, which is called the LDL, small particles, is increased by a high carbohydrate diet. And that's what you're not told. So if you eat a high carbohydrate diet, it's absolutely true that your cholesterol may come down. And then we focus on that and say it's good. But unfortunately, there are about 15 things that go wrong on the other side, which we ignore. And one of them is these small LDL particles, which are considered to be the really toxic agents in heart disease. In addition, if you're carbohydrate intolerant, eating high carbohydrate diet, you get overweight, your blood pressure goes up, your glucose control gets worse. And those are all directly linked to heart disease risk. You cannot just take your cholesterol and say, oh, my cholesterol is low. Because in fact, most people with heart disease have normal cholesterol. And that's the other paradox that people won't address. So we're not saying cholesterol is completely unimportant. It is important, but in a way that is completely misunderstood. And it's not the fat that gives you the bad cholesterol in the bloodstream. It's a high carbohydrate diet if you're insulin resistant. And that's the key. So we have to individualize it to people and realizing that a high-fat diet is the treatment of choice for people who are carbohydrate intolerant.
And when we talk about a high-fat diet, what does that include? What are these fats that we should be eating?
That's also a good question. So I think what's more important is the fats that should be avoided.
Okay.
And that's actually all the fats that they've told you that are healthy. Okay, except, I mean, they've told you olive oil and coconut oil are healthy, and that's the truth, but all the seed oils, so sunflower oil, canola oil, I think safflower, rapeseed oil, all of those, and corn oil are terrible for your health.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Because they're high in omega-6s. So these are polyunsaturated fatty acids. Now, in 1977, when the US Department of Agriculture came along with their new guidelines, they focused on saturated fat as being unhealthy. And we know it's not, because we know there are populations in Europe, for example, have very high saturated fat intake, like the French and the Swiss, who have almost no heart disease. They have the lowest rates of heart disease in Europe, and they eat the most saturated fat. So it's not saturated fat. It's what's really changed in our diets. In fact, is our saturated fat intake's gone down, but the partially hydrogenated oils have gone up. The vegetable oils, the partially hydrogenated vegetable oils have increased.
Like chip oil.
Precisely, and they are full of what we call omega-6s, which are very toxic for the body. So in the past, we had lots of omega-3s from fish oil and other sources, and very little from omega-6s. Now the ratio is reversed completely. So if you're cooking in sunflower oil and you're eating food from animals that are not pasture-raised, in other words, they're feedlot raised, and you're taking eggs that are not pasture-raised, that are fed on corn, you're having a high omega-6 in your diet. And omega-6 is very, very toxic to the body. It's linked directly to heart disease and cancer. But no one will tell you that. And of course, omega-6 is full of these artificial plastic margarines, which you also don't want to eat because they've got the wrong types of fats in them.
And why will no one tell us this?
Because big industry runs what you eat, determines what you eat. And that determines the messaging you get, because they influence the scientists, unfortunately. And the classic example happened yesterday, that a major scientific paper showing that genetically modified foods caused cancers in rats was removed. It was removed from the scientific literature because of companies' pressure on the journal to remove that paper. Wow. Because it's the first one, which is a long-term study showing the dangers of GMO foods. And as long as that's in the scientific literature, there's real concern for the manufacturers of GMO foods. That's how powerful industry is. And we have to look and we have to see that we are much less healthy today than we were in 1977. It is clearly obvious. And what have we done? We're not eating real foods anymore. That's the difference. And that's the cause of our ill health. So that's what the book is trying to say. Eat real foods and you'll be healthy.
Well, let's talk about some of those other fats.
Okay, so the bad fats we've covered now. The good fats, just back to what the good fats used to be, like good old round on meat. Everyone cuts the fat off meat and throws it away. And then they just eat the lean sort of steak, and they're throwing away all the good stuff. So any rendered animal fat, chicken skin, the good thick lamb chop fat, butter is a great one that everyone chucks out. Olive oil is something that people get wrong. Olive oil is very good for you until it is heated over 70 degrees. Once it goes over 70, it becomes like a nasty fat. So when people cook with olive oil, it's cooking in vain. It's just a very expensive waste of oil. Yeah. Whereas coconut oil is brilliant for you, and it has a very, very high smoking point. So if you're going to cook and you want a healthy fat to cook in butter or coconut oil. Coconut oil is just an amazing thing. It's very good for your skin, and you can eat it and rub it all over yourself. It's just, yeah, that's very, very good. Yeah. So yeah, I would say those three are my top three.